Let's start with a definition of what Ajax stands for and what we generally mean when we refer to Ajax application development. So first of all, Ajax traditionally has stood for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. This was a term that was coined by a guy named Jesse James Garrett in an article back in 2005. And he just observed that modern web applications were being built using an XML HTTP request object for asynchronous callbacks with lots of JavaScript interacting with the DOM and often using XML. The term is used a bit more generally than that these days, and that's probably why you most often see it spelled with a lowercase JAX, so capital A, lowercase JAX, not to imply that it always means asynchronous JavaScript and XML, but to say that's a general style of web development. So what we really mean when we talk about Ajax style applications is we mean that we're using XHTML and CSS for markup, traditional HTML markup. We're probably using some DOM manipulation, interacting with the client-side document object model for a more interactive experience with users. We might be using XML and XSLT for some of the data interchange and transformation. We're probably also using, or instead perhaps using, JavaScript object notation, or JSON, for actually serializing objects to communicate them up to the client from the server. That's definitely the case with ASP.NET Ajax. Almost always Ajax refers to using this object, the XML HTTP request class, which is a client-side class available in most browsers for initiating asynchronous callbacks to the server. And that's really what fundamentally distinguishes an Ajax style of application from a traditional postback style. And then we're always going to be using JavaScript for our client-side development. So all the interaction with the XML HTTP request class and the manipulation of the DOM and the serialization of the JSON objects and all that, this will all happen through JavaScript. Now, one of the best ways to sort of get a sense for what's possible with Ajax style of development is just to go out and look at what people are doing in web applications today. Google has a number of applications. In fact, most of their web applications are heavily Ajax oriented, and they've really helped pioneer this field in many ways. So that's always a good place to go look at what's possible and what people are doing. So the Maps program at Google, the Mail program, the Gmail, their calendar application, among others. And then just almost any site that you go to today is going to have some amount of Ajax style development inside of it. Microsoft has a number of really rich Ajax-enabled sites, like their Maps site, comparable to Google's, their Hotmail site. In fact, Microsoft was the original motivation behind the XML HTTP request object. They provided the first implementation of that in IE 5, I believe. And their motivation was to create a much richer Outlook web application for clients to access. So they've been there from the beginning as well. But even smaller sites that you run across today, like Sidestep, is an interesting one to go look at for selecting cities and doing some filtering. And then Kayak is an interesting one to look at, as well as Panic. I'm sure you can come up with your own list of 20 sites that are using Ajax today. But let's just take a look at a couple here. Let's go to maps.google.com and point out a couple of differences from what you might see in a traditional postback style application. So first of all, notice as I interact with this application, it's a much more, it feels much more responsive. And there's also no navigation history. If I go back, I actually go to the initial last time before I posted the search for the city here. So all of that information, all of that interaction that was happening after I performed that search was not happening via traditional postback, but rather was happening via asynchronous callbacks to the server in response to interaction from the client. In this case, by moving my mouse around and dragging things around. Let's go look at another one. Go to kayak.com. This is a travel site where you can search for flights and that sort of thing. That actually was a good example right there of a Ajax style interface. So as I type into this text box, notice it gives me a drop-down list of possible airports I might have intended to type in. That's a really convenient way of reducing someone's search. And then if I go ahead and click search here, this is an interesting use of Ajax as well. Notice what they do is they report back the sites, the examples to you, or the flights to you as they come through. So as the server was performing the searches, they sent back results to populate the page as I was interacting with it. So there are a lot of interesting things you can do with Ajax style development, and it sort of it gives you a much wider surface area to target, much more potential for interacting with the client and making a more usable and friendly application. So what ends up happening generally, if you want to sort of look at what the main distinction is between traditional browser applications and Ajax-enabled applications, is traditional browser clients are pretty much constrained to this post-back model, where the user types a bunch of things into fields on the form, submits the page by posting it. The server processes that post request and then populates a response based on that request and sends it back to the client. And this time right here, the time between when the user actually submits the request and posts the response, is idle time for the client. And if this is any significant amount of time, the user sees his browser or her browser freeze up, and that little bar at the bottom is just going to sort of hang there until the response is completed and the results are served back. So that's sort of the traditional sequential model of operation. Ajax is going to add more functionality to the client, and it's going to make it more interactive. So as the user performs operations, again, think of the map program, what happened when you dragged your mouse. There were definitely requests going back to the server to retrieve information, but the browser client wasn't frozen, and it wasn't sitting there waiting for a response. The user continued to interact with it. And data was sent back either in the form of HTML markup and perhaps CSS, or perhaps just raw data, maybe JSON serialized data or XON serialized data. And that was then processed in the client-side code and then somehow displayed to the user, probably using JavaScript and the document object model. So the end result is we're moving away from this sort of sequential round trip that has been the hallmark of traditional web applications, to a much more interactive and finer grained model, where you respond to exactly what the user has requested and populate things in a much more on-demand fashion.